forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Dace, wearing almost the exact same colored shirt as my co-host Aaron McIntyre. I guess we didn't plan that out. We don't care, though, because we're not chicks. We don't care about that, right? As long as we're not wearing the same underwear, that would be a problem. Anything short of that, though, I think we're okay.
How about the weather out there? I mean,
the weather outside is nice, frightful.
You know,
yes.
Not super hot.
So how you been, man? With
good.
Your similar to mine blue shirt. How you doing?
I'm very uncomfortable. How about yourself?
We are otherwise known as Cringe. That's the name of our garage band, Cringe. That's a great name for a garage band, by the way, like Backdoor Cover or Cringe. Yeah. All right, so this week on Bigger Ten, we have a special episode because the season draws nigh. Aaron, we are just about, July 22nd. So 3 weeks from Friday is Big Ten football media days, right?
Yeah. It's coming right up.
It is. And one of the cool episodes we do every year here on Bigger Ten is Athlon Sports in its college football preview has anonymous Big Ten coach quotes on every other Big Ten team. This is where coaches, could be head coaches, assistant coaches, who fear no reprisal because their names are not mentioned, just riff on as brutally honest as they can on every team in the Big Ten. We like to go through and kind of picture a morsel or a snapshot of those comments and then comment on them ourselves. And so we're going to do that with this episode of Bigger Ten. What do Big Ten coaches think of the other teams in the Big Ten when they don't think they have to be accountable for thinking this way, right?
Yep. Let's
do this alphabetically. We're going to go through all 14 teams here. Let's do this alphabetically, and we will begin with Illinois. All right? So, Brett Bielema taking over. Here's the quote we have. The real job for Brett Bielema here is recruiting. This is a poorly recruited state with more talent than people realize. You can pull great players if you win some in-state battles. Aaron, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it sounds like that could have come from anybody. I mean, we've been saying that for years, have we not?
The late Bino Cook used to say the two schools he always thought should win more are Illinois and Missouri, given the amount of the population bases there and the fact that there's no Illinois State or Missouri State to contend with, right?
Precisely, yeah, and that's obviously something. Maybe Brett Bielema will be able to bring that to Illinois. You know, he did fairly well at Wisconsin. Fairly well, he did great at Wisconsin, but how much of that is still Barry Alvarez pulling the strings, whatnot, coasting off the fumes? Arkansas. I mean, he recruited as you probably should at an SEC school. The results on the field obviously were not there, or else he would still be there. And now we're at Illinois, so he's back in the Big Ten. I could totally see, though, just going off of what I know to be his seeming personality. As much as he loves the Iowa Hawkeyes, he's going to make that game his Super Bowl, at least for the first few years as he's building that. Because then I think he's going to be able to do a lot better job recruiting than Lovey did and his predecessors as well.
That would help by actually recruiting.
Instead of just raiding the transfer portal. And that's what I'm talking about. And I think he has the chops to actually develop some talent, which helps. So I think he will be able to do that. I would love to know who gave that quote. Well, I'd love to know because it's not really an original thought. That's something that
I agree.
So many
I mean, you can say that about every
said.
school, right? If they recruit well, they win. I took it in this case to mean that Brett brings a serious coaching resume to the table. And it's a college coaching resume because Lovie Smith had a serious resume too. It just was all in the NFL. But that Brett brings a serious college coaching resume to the table. And so it's not about, does he know how to put together a competent program? Does he know how to mentor young men and the differences in coaching in college compared to the NFL? It's really going to be about whether he is able to win recruiting battles because he'll put a competent program out there given his track record. That's kind of the way that I viewed it, which is why I took the quote. But I can see why you would come to the conclusion of, well, no Shiite there, Sherlock. I mean, if everybody recruits well, they're going to do well, right?
True, but I think it's uniquely true in Illinois. It's kind of like the Midwest's in terms of football. It's kind of like the Midwest's Maryland. There's no excuse not to recruit Illinois well. So that's kind of how I took it.
And we probably don't have room in our league for another successful developmental program. So they're going to have to pound the pavement from a recruiting standpoint. Let's go to Indiana. Here's the quote. I think Tom Allen is the real deal. That culture is the real deal. That's not put on stuff for TV. Those kids play their asses off for him. Aaron.
Now, these are the more interesting quotes, because those are perspectives that you think you get on TV that I've mentioned a few times, like after he knocked off Michigan last year, and the way the players responded and the way that the love that they seem to have for their head coach. So you think you see that on TV, it's pretty obvious, but then when you hear that from an opposing coach who's actually seen that up close and personal, maybe multiple times, it lends it some more credence. And I know we'll be talking about this a little bit more in the next segment for Would You Rather, but I think it lends more credence because, again, this is coming from a coach probably who's seen Allen and his players and the way that they treat each other, talk to each other multiple times on the field.
First win over Penn State in decades, first win over Michigan since 1987. It had been the longest dominance in one series by one school over the other and going in college football until last year. Highest finish in the final AP poll since 1967, which was the last time they represented the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. I mean, Tom Allen is blazing a trail there in Bloomington. We go to a team you know quite a bit about. Iowa is next. This isn't Kirk Ferentz's best team by any stretch, but they're still really consistent, really Iowa. The main thing to watch with Chris Doyle, the former strength and conditioning coach, gone, is this was one of the best developmental programs in the country.
Now, this is a little bit of a departure from the boilerplate quote that we usually get about Kirk Ferentz. The boilerplate quote, I don't know if you've noticed this. The boilerplate is usually, wow, he's still there. That's usually what we get. Yeah. Now, this one is a little bit different because it mentions
that was part of the larger quote. I just left that out because we get that all the time.
Okay, gotcha. Now, this is a little bit different, a little bit of a departure, because you're talking about the entire foundation of the team, which is not something we get every single year. And I think, I'm not sure about this year, but surely in the next 1 to 2 years, 1 to 2 seasons, we'll be seeing how much of an impact Chris Doyle had, because I don't think there's any question. There's no question whatsoever that it will be different. Now, how different? Is it a different that they can survive in terms of the strength and conditioning, which your boy Matt Campbell likes to say, winning in the dark? Is that going to be that much of a departure because the guy that they took to fill his place was his number 2 man. So there's definitely the DNA is still there. The culture is still probably there, but how much of an impact does he have personally on that? We still probably won't know for another season or two.
The aforementioned Maryland Terps, who you invoked in vain a few minutes ago, here's the quote on them. Quote, "They have a high ceiling and a low floor. It could all fall apart on them, or those young guys they've recruited could explode, and the offense really takes off."
Yeah, I don't know what that to me sounds like a coach saying this guy on the screen doesn't really make the most.
Well, Mike Loxley may have the worst record in the history of college football coaching.
I think it's a nice way of saying, basically, if the players come together in and of themselves, it'll be, if they have success, it's going to be because of the players, not necessarily because of Mike Loxley.
Do we just have this conversation about Maryland in
Every
general?
Single
with like basketball
year.
Too. Like it's always a high variance team, and it's got to be really schizophrenic to be a Maryland fan, right? I mean, you just because the analysis on them always seems to be a high variance team. And I think we'll get that in basketball next year now that Daryl Morsell has retired. He's transferred to Marquette, and yet they brought in a couple of other two of the biggest name transfers on the entire transfer market. Maryland brought them both in. So is that addition by subtraction? Are they going to be better, about the same? It just seems like the sports we follow the most, football and men's basketball, Maryland is always a high variance analysis.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that has to do with the coaching, and that sounds like what this coach is saying here. It's just a nice way of saying they don't really have a culture. If you have a culture, you know what you're going to get year in and year out. Wisconsin is a great example of that, especially in basketball. Not the last year, 2 years notwithstanding, but culture is what keeps things from being so much in flux and variance year in and year out. And they just haven't had that in both the sports you mentioned.
I mean, Maryland fans were hoping Mark Turgeon was going to take the Oklahoma job. Like UCF fans were ecstatic that Josh Heupel went to Tennessee. They think they upgraded actually in their calculus. All right, let's go to a team that I know very well. Let's go to Michigan. Quote: "If you took the name Michigan off, most coaches in the country would be happy to have the success they've had or to have those players on the roster. But they're Michigan, so you can't be unremarkable."
I know that this is going to be obvious from an honest Michigan perspective, not just a maize and blue tinged glass perspective, but an honest Michigan perspective, and maybe surprising elsewhere. That quote is actually right on the dang money. And the same could go for Nebraska as well if we were in a different era, and really should be now, and Penn State too. 8-4, 9-3, 10-2 every now and then. That's not going to cut it. That's just not going to cut it.
Right.
9-3 is your low water mark if you're a Michigan, if you're a Penn State, if you're I'm not going to say Nebraska. They are not anywhere close to what they used to be. But that quote is absolutely correct, and I think that's probably the most honest analysis that we've had so far in these quotes.
Yeah, I can't beg to differ with it. I mean, that last line especially, but they're Michigan, so you can't be unremarkable.
Yep.
I mean, I think that sums it up absolutely perfectly. So let's go to Sparty. Quote: "Mel Tucker is going to be a recruiting-focused guy, trying to turn that brand into a peer of Michigan and Ohio State. But when you can't land the same 5 stars, are you going to be able to make those 3 stars work for you like D'Antonio did?" I took this quote to mean, Aaron, that Tucker has his eyes set on larger aspirations as a coach. All right, that's why he left Colorado after just 1 year, to jump to the Big Ten. And that this isn't going to be some 10 to 15 year lifer like Mark D'Antonio, kind of taking the Wisconsin model. Let's take a lot of developmental kids, or as Kirk Ferentz likes to say, they come here looking like 2 or 3 stars, and 4 or 5 years later, they walk out of here looking like 4 and 5 stars, right? That Mel, that's why you're seeing him play the transfer portal so aggressively. He's going to want to make a splash. And so he's going to say, hey, why can't we get the kids that are going to Michigan and Ohio State to come here instead? I took this quote to be dubious that he could pull that off. And in the cost of doing so, or that the cost of doing so would be they might lose the identity that actually put him on an even, or in the case of the Michigan State rivalry, a higher pedestal for a while with the template that D'Antonio had.
You can play the transfer portal game for only so long before it catches up with you. Eventually, you have to be a really, really good coach if you want to be considered a really, really good program. Nick Saban is a hell of a contributor. Nick Saban is a hell of a coach. He is a hell of a recruiter as well. But you know which one actually I think came first? The coaching part. If you're a really, really good coach, players are going to want to play for you, and so that makes recruiting a lot easier. So I don't think this is going to be a long-term strategy, and I kind of thought that was the way that quote was going, reading in between the lines, that unless he doesn't pull this off and start to make a splash within the next 1 or 2 years, what is he going to be left with? And unless he can coach really, really well, or at least have a staff around him who can coach those guys up really well, I think that's gonna come back to bite him.
Let's go to Minnesota. Here's the quote that we have from them, from an anonymous Big Ten coach. Quote: "This is a big year for PJ Fleck. They could use a touch of that Iowa-Wisconsin offensive line development, and they don't have anyone that looks like the playmakers they had a few years ago."
Well, that's honest. I think that's also maybe a tongue-in-cheek way of saying this could be a very, very difficult season for Minnesota, or at least that's what the coach thinks who provided that quote. Because here's the one thing you have to have if you don't have a good offensive line. You got to have playmakers. And he says you don't have playmakers. And so if you don't have, and here's the thing, if you don't have really good playmakers, you got to have a good offensive line, because at least you can just run the ball and be somewhat competent on offense. If you have neither of those things, which the coach seems to believe Minnesota does, and he's absolutely right, whoever this is, he's absolutely right. This is going to be a pivotal year for PJ Fleck and the Gophers. You're gonna have some trouble on that side of the ball. We saw that last year. Frankly, in the games that they did play, we saw a lot of really, really mediocre at best offense. So I think there is some, I think from the Big Ten coaching perspective, there is some concern there whether or not this is going to be another type of step in the right direction type of year for Minnesota.
What I hear this coach saying, because part of the larger quote also is why he's not liked by other Big Ten West coaches, et cetera, talking about PJ Fleck. So Fleck's a Jim Tressel disciple. Say what you want about Jim Tressel and his recruiting tactics or his veracity to the NCAA, but he built a program of substance, old school, power spread, Ohio State, right? And so that's where Fleck comes out of. What I hear this saying is that he got lucky one year, flash in the pan. Minnesota had maybe the two best receivers in school history on the team at the same time, in Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman. Maybe the two best receivers on a Big Ten team not called Ohio State in quite some time. And so they were able to out-match up and out-athlete teams on the outside because of that. That covered a multitude of sins. Remember, their quarterback, Tanner Morgan, I think had the fourth highest QBR in the history of the Big Ten Conference that season. And so those two guys made them look a lot better than they were. Now, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's kind of how I took this analysis, and this is a year where they've got to actually be like good at football, the fundamentals of it, and he hasn't proven yet as a coach that he can do that. That's kind of the way I took this comment.
Yep, and that's, that kind of goes back to what I was saying as well. I mean, if you're, especially with the offensive line, if you don't have development there, and this is his fourth or fifth year in the Big Ten, you don't have development there, that's not a good sign. Now maybe we'll see that this year. Again, the COVID stuff from last year covers a multitude of sins, so it seems. Maybe there was some more actual development going on this offseason. It's just tough to use last year as any sort of barometer. Let's
go to one of the more intriguing quotes here. This is Nebraska is next. Quote, I think it's time to start talking about the bigger picture here. They're so far from where they expected to be under Scott Frost. Something isn't matching up inside the program. They don't have a cohesive identity. The questions all lead straight to the head coach.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch. Steve, do you know who the starting quarterback of the Nebraska Cornhuskers is going to be this year?
Well, they only have one now. It's going to be Adrian Martinez. That's all they got. Yeah.
And the fact that we don't last year, it was all up in the air in terms of I think they were using two quarterbacks at one point.
Him and Luke McCaffrey. Yeah.
And the fact that it could be anybody. I don't think that Frost had enough time to develop as a coach himself. I just don't think that I think he's way out over his skis here. I don't think that that's any groundbreaking analysis either.
Yeah.
And I think that's obvious to other Big Ten coaches as well. And I don't know. The very fact that we're having this conversation this many years down the road, Nebraska, they still have so much fan support. They've got a lot going for themselves. But guys, they're still in Nebraska. They still have the Block N, They still have somewhat of that brand. But if this thing tanks any further, you're looking at some pretty dark times ahead. And so I think the coach definitely sees that, who provided this quote saying, you know what, the bigger picture here is at stake with Nebraska. Your brand from the 90s is this close from not really being that much of a that much of a factor anymore. And once you start losing that recruiting, and you're known as the 4-5 or whatever team, or 4-8 type of team, that's just not going to be good.
In some respects, this is similar to the Harbaugh conversation. Now, the difference is Harbaugh is a much more proven college coach, inherited a roster much more ready to win from Brady Hoke. But what do we say about Harbaugh? What's the identity? Yeah, Michigan under Harbaugh has had 5 wins by quarterbacks he's recruited in high school. We're going into that's in 6 years. But look at all the transfers under Nebraska and everything as well. What's Nebraska's identity? I mean, Michigan's identity is Harbaugh, right? What's Nebraska's identity? Frost, right?
Yep.
And so, I mean, what's the culture of that team? What's their backbone? What do they rely upon? In some respects, the two situations with favorite sons here are similar. It's just Harbaugh was more developed as a coach along the lines of what you said than Frost, okay? But so, I mean, he's just got more experience and is better at the job. But the fundamental issues that the two programs have under their respected leaders right now, I think there's a lot of similarity there. Now, contrast that with these quotes from Northwestern. Listen to this. This is maybe one of the best coaching staffs in the country, certainly the best in the conference. This is as hardworking a program as there is in the game. Now, see, this guy right here, who you know is my man crush, he's the most decorated modern player this program's ever had. 2-time National Defensive Player of the Year, right? Okay. And yet, he's not the identity of the program. So even though Pat Fitzgerald cast just as big a shadow, maybe even larger, at Northwestern, because, I mean, Scott Frost was a great player. He was like the 4th or 5th best quarterback of the Osborne era, okay? Maybe. Jim Harbaugh is a great player, maybe the best quarterback Michigan's ever had. He also might have been, I don't know, I mean, on that same team, Jamie Morris was the all-time leading rusher. Both his wide receivers went on to the NFL, as did his tight. You see what I'm saying? I mean, Fitzgerald cast, I think, a taller shadow on that campus than either Frost or Harbaugh do on theirs. And yet we know what the identity is, Aaron, of Northwestern football. And we don't say the name.
Thick ankles and tall grass.
Yeah, we don't say the name Pat Fitzgerald. We say their identity, their culture. When we say Michigan and Nebraska, we say the name of the alum, not what the actual essence of the style of play or the identity of the way they play.
And let's extend that even further. What's the identity of Alabama? The premier
process.
Program. The process.
The Saban process, yes.
And so he is part of that. He is part of that identity. But you know what? What we're really saying is that the real identity is when Saban or whoever else from Alabama holds up their fingers and say, "Hey, look at all the national championships." That's the identity of Alabama. Same could be said on a little bit lower level of Clemson. So when you've got one guy being your identity, it's not good for them either.
Right.
On a human level.
How about this one on Ohio State, man? This is solid gold, and I freaking hate that, okay? They're scary in every phase. They're scary situationally, and they're scary in warm-ups. I don't think anyone is close to their level. Why do I think a Michigan coach might have said that? I'm sorry, but that quote is unbelievable, okay?
Oh, no.
Because it's also true.
If a Michigan coach, do you really believe a Michigan coach?
No, I was joking.
Oh,
I was
goodness.
joking. No.
If a Michigan coach said that, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That would be,
I mean, it's what they would say if we put the Wonder Woman lasso of truth on them. But no, I don't believe a Michigan coach said that. But I mean, that quote, dude, not that they need any help, man, but that is going into every recruiting portfolio of any player I want, is that quote right there.
Because it's true, especially in this league, and maybe especially this year, although I think the whole, and you've said this before, the whole league probably looking for a step back, but they're still going to be so far ahead of everybody. If you're lining up Jimmys and Joes, they've got it. It's just whether or not they'll be able to continue to put plays together, enough of them to, blow out opponents every week. So
here's another one that I found very intriguing. Maybe next to the Nebraska one, this is the most intriguing. It's Penn State, because the national narrative is, it's funny, because Penn State beat Ohio State once, okay? Then James Franklin's road record against ranked teams and stuff never gets brought up. But since Harbaugh's never done it, his gets brought up all the time, right? And so Michigan and Michigan and Penn State had very similar years last year, but Penn State went into the year with a lot higher expectations. They were a preseason top 10 team. They're the first preseason top 10 team in history, Aaron, to start 0-5. No one's ever done it, okay, until last year. And yet, the narrative, and I kind of buy into this a little bit too, the narrative is that was COVID, it was an outlier, blow it up, it doesn't count. While the narrative on Michigan, which I kind of buy into as well, is that was emblematic of larger problems, right? So listen to this anonymous coach quote for Penn State. Quote, "This is going to be a fascinating team to watch. James Franklin is going to try to convince us everything that went wrong in the program last year can be contained to last year. And I'm not so sure about that."
Oh, man. I love... So here's the thing with these coach quotes. About 85% of them are ho-hum, ho-hum. It's like the Kirk Ferentz example. Oh, he's still there. It's like the Ohio State example. Oh, man, they're really, really, really... There's giants in the land of Canaan, basically. And then the 15 other percent, they are like, yikes. Yikes. And that's a yikes quote, because when you talk about Penn State, the identity is not James Franklin, I don't think. But still, we're talking, I sense a theme here. What is their identity? What is their cultural identity there? And, for those couple of years that they had Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley, you could say smash mouth football on both sides of the ball. They would really get after you and hit you in the face. Now it's been 2-3 years, I want to say, that we're not really sure. They've just been a little bit soft around the edges, and we'll see if that can turn around. But I think that's starting to become apparent to other coaches as well.
Okay, we have 3 more. Purdue is next. All right, here's what they said about Purdue. They've earned a reputation. Pardon me. They've earned a reputation of being much about flash and not substance because they made so much noise and then disappeared. They've cycled through so many defensive coordinators that people are starting to talk about what it's like to work for Jeff Brom.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like Carl Lewis just tried singing the national anthem there in West Lafayette, right?
Yep. This is going to be a make or break year, I believe, for Jeff Brom and Purdue. If they can put together a solid campaign and go 7-5, 6-6, make it to a bowl game, I think he'll get another few years, but boy howdy. I think the walls are closing in a little bit faster than I think most of us anticipated.
Nice reference. All right, let's go to Rutgers. All right, quote, "Greg Schiano has definitely reestablished their recruiting identity, but the knock on his previous success at Rutgers is it all came in the old Big East. And will that blueprint work for winning games in the tougher Big Ten?"
Again, like Maryland, like Missouri, like Illinois, you should be able to recruit very well. In New Jersey, whether or not he'll be able to do that remains to be seen. If he recruits well, we know he can coach pretty well. So I think recruiting is going to be his biggest thing. And if he can hit that out of the park, he'll be competitive at the very least.
And we close with maybe the most boring quote of them all, but given the program it's associated with, they will take that as a compliment. All right. They want a drama-free zone there in Madison, Wisconsin. This quote is it, quote, "They've been doing a really nice job in recruiting, which has always been what separates them from the elite programs like Ohio State. They're positioned really well to return to form and go back to Indianapolis."
Can't really argue with that. Can't really argue with that at all. Again, like I said earlier, the COVID thing covers a multitude of sins. We'll see whether or not Graham Mertz can be the guy that we saw in that first game against Illinois last year. That's going to be their biggest question mark, because I don't care. I don't care what you have at running back or on defense. If your quarterback looks like the Graham Mertz that we saw that first game, you're going to go a long ways. If he looks like the Graham Mertz we saw the rest of the season, you're not going to go very far.
Well, there you have it. Overall theme, a big thing that stuck out for you as we went through all 14 of those. Was there anything in particular?
Culture and identity matters.
Yeah.
If it's wrapped up in a person, you're probably a fan of a team that's not very good. If it's wrapped up in something that's tangible that you can see on the field, you're probably competitive.
That's a great observation. We'll come back, play our weekly game of Would You Rather next. And it's that time again to play Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. And Aaron, I have one for you to lead it off here. Would you rather hire Scott Frost or Brett Bielema to rebuild your college football program?
Man, that's a really good question, because with both of them, with both cases, the first Division I or a major job that they went to after the first one, things kind of flamed out in both cases with Bielema at Arkansas and Frost at Nebraska. So I guess the question would be, at what level? Is this Group of Five or Power Five? And I'll just take it at Power Five, since we're talking about, let's say, Iowa Craters. I think I would rather go with Brett Bielema in this scenario, especially since he's an alum of Iowa. So that would be nice. But I think overall, Brett Bielema has shown some more steadiness, and the type of steadiness that you really want to see from your head football coach. The Scott Frost kind of faux tough guy thing that we've seen, that works if your name is Nick Saban. That does not work if your name is Scott Frost and you're coming from South Florida or Central Florida. I'm sorry. With your as good as you were, you still have to develop that resume, and you still have to develop that swagger, which he just does not have. So I would take Brett Bielema. Next one is for you. Would you rather have Fran McCaffrey as your head coach in basketball or Greg Gard?
I'll go with Fran, because I think there will at least be an entertaining brand of basketball. And for the histrionics, when the players themselves have a chance to communicate what they think, we don't have stuff coming out like what happened with Greg Gard, for example, this just about a month ago. Somebody recorded a players meeting with him from last season and leaked it to the media, and it's not a good look on anybody's part, the kind of stuff that can tear a program apart once it gets out, actually. So with Fran, I know I'm going to get an entertaining brand of basketball, and I'm going to get a guy that's his own man as a coach. Meaning he's been elsewhere and been successful on his own. He had to rebuild, those of us that remember that era of Iowa basketball, he had to rebuild that program from primordial ooze, basically. Yeah. We have no clue what Greg Gard can do. He took over for arguably the best coaching job in this conference since the Katie Knight era, is what was done at Wisconsin under his predecessor. And so can he do this job on his own, or is he just coasting off those fumes? I know what Fran is. I don't think he's a great coach. I'm not even sure he's a really good one. But I think he's a competent one, and he's his own man. I don't really know that I know that about Greg Gard.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All right, for you. Would you rather stay and sustain at Indiana or level up for a more marquee program if you were Tom Allen? And I ask it with this framework. You're not going to be able to over the long haul. There's just too many resources, especially now with NIL coming in. On a consistent basis, you're not going to outperform Michigan and Penn State. There are going to be eras where one of them doesn't have its stuff together, okay? But you did catch both of them in a year that they didn't have their stuff together and took advantage over it. Over the long haul, do you think you can pull that off with Ohio State in there too? Because I don't. All right? So, but you can make a lot of money and a lot of friends, brother, going 8-4, 9-3, 7-5 every year at Indiana. Or are you thinking, hey, USC may open up this year. That might be the best job in college football. I mean, what would you do, though, if you were him? I don't think it's an easy call.
No, I think this one is a great call. This is a great proposition for a reason that you didn't even bring up quite yet. What's going to happen with the divisions? Because you're right, it's obvious in the long haul.
Oh, that's another great point. They're probably going to go away.
If we stick with the divisions, then over the long haul.
That does change the calculus now with them. I agree. Yeah.
Penn State and Michigan are kind of irrelevant then in that situation, because you can lose to Ohio State. I don't know how the schedules would be done. You could lose to Ohio State or whoever's the biggest top dog in the conference that year. Go to the championship game, play competitively, and still have an outside chance of making it to the playoff. Yeah. And that's on a good year or even a. So he's got things rolling there right now. If the proposition was in the next 2 to 3 years that divisions will be done away with, I don't think that's going to happen at that time frame. It could, but I don't think it's going to happen I would say stay at Indiana. Why go somewhere else, completely build something up? You don't know what things are going to be like in California with NIL, and you just don't know what those schools are going to be like over there. You have a known quantity that you've already built. Stick with that. Final one for you. Would you rather be Ohio State, and I'm talking from a program's perspective here, would you rather be Ohio State or Alabama when it comes to name, image, and likeness?
This one's an easy one, actually. Ohio State, and it's not even close. Here's why. Columbus, by some measures, is a top 10 television market in the country, okay? The only competitive sports competition you have there at the major league level is a hockey team. So, I mean, you're talking about a major population center, and then we're not even talking about the spillover of Cincinnati and Cleveland, Toledo, Youngstown. I mean, these are places where lots of people live. It's not even close. There's more opportunity to exploit NIL at Ohio State than Alabama. Even in your own native market, I would say that's the case, let alone the television markets that the rest of your state can potentially bring to the table at the exact same time.
Well said.
All right, we'll come back, wrap it up with our feedback of the week and our Twitter poll next. Twitter poll results for this week. We asked you, which of these Big Ten football teams would you be most willing to bet your last $100 on exceeding their 2021 win total? And look who is a resounding first place. Now, maybe those are just all our Patreon supporters, and they know that Illinois over is one of my best bets this year, all right? But Illinois almost lapping the field there. I mean, they do actually, because they got twice as many votes as Rutgers at 23%. Minnesota, whose win total I believe is 7, so only 16.7% would put their last $100 on that going over. Nebraska's win total, guys, is 6. Aaron, it's
That's
6,
huge,
and they're last. Amongst our followers on Twitter, only 12.7% going into Scott Frost, 5th year? And what are they? 6th, 7th all-time in wins. And yet only 12.7% of our audience, if they had to get down with their last $100, would go ahead and bet on the Huskers to win more than 6 games, which, by the way, Pro Football Focus says they have the toughest schedule in the country this fall.
Yeah, that's going to help. Yeah, I mean, just looking from a macro perspective, anytime you get a Power 5 football team with a win total as low as Illinois, and you know that you have 3 non-conference games, that's a really, really tough proposition to pass up.
To pass that up, yeah. That leads right into our feedback of the week. The big news since our last episode is out of nowhere. Nebraska AD Bill Moos announced his retirement. Landon Keim says Moos was a short-term hire from the get-go. Not sure if the reasons for his somewhat sudden retirement will ever be fully public, but I believe 5 years from now, Moos will be thought of highly in regards to his 3 big hires, Frost, Hoiberg, and Bolt. I'm not so sure about that, okay? And let's look at Hoiberg, for example. He's going into year 3 for him, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to be better? He's got a 5-star recruit coming in. Would you pick Illinois or Nebraska right now in basketball to not have to play night 1 of the Big Ten tournament? I wouldn't. They might get there. They might finish 11th or 10th, but would you pick that right now?
No,
I would not.
No.
And we're going into year 3 for him. We're going into year 5 with Frost. Hasn't even had a winning record yet. Arguably, the best stretch of football they played was that stretch the second half of the year, his first year in 2018. So, I don't know. So actually, this would be his 4th year. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's a very highly optimistic view of or outlook for things. Hoiberg, I would have more hope with Hoiberg because there's a track record there, a fairly lengthy track record at that level when he was with Iowa State. Frost, going into year 4 or whatever we're on now, again, we go back to the conversation that we had earlier in the show. What's the identity of Nebraska football? If you don't have that within the first 2 to 3 years, you could be losing games. But if you're losing in the same way, or if you're losing because of a deficiency over here, but you're still really, really, really consistent on one area in one area, then we can have a different conversation. But it seems like you're losing in different ways every single week, every single year. It's never your fault. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. Things could turn around, but it's definitely not a good sign. And I think that's an overly optimistic view. And Moose, I've heard a few things. I don't know what you've heard. I've heard a few things about why he decided to retire, and it's not exactly pretty.
Yeah, I've not heard anything.
Nothing criminal, but it's not.
Yeah,
you know,
I'd
it's
not.
a little tawdry.
Co-eds? Is that what I hear you saying?
Not that, no.
Okay, because sometimes
he was
that's...
just a very, very effective fundraiser.
Gotcha. All right, that'll do it for our current episode of Bigger Ten. We'll be back with another one in 2 weeks as we get ever so closer to the start of the football season. Until then, remember, follow us on Twitter at Bigger Ten to keep up to date on what we think about all things Big Ten. And you can like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, comment, whichever the case may be here on YouTube or iTunes, Stitcher, etc. However you watch or listen to this each and every week, and please help us get the word out to other Big Ten fans just like you. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you next time right here on Bigger Ten.